Hello everyone, this is Ranjitha, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, Holy Cross College. In this video, I am going to talking about consumer surplus. Let us see the learning objectives of consumer surplus. The learners will be able to get an insight into the concept of consumer surplus, and they can able to calculate the consumer surplus, and they can identify the importance of consumer surplus at the end of this lesson. Next, we move on to the introduction part. Consumer surplus was discovered by Jules Dupit in the year 1884. He was a French economist. After that, this concept was later popularized by British economist Alfred Marshall. The concept was based on the assumption that the degree of satisfaction of consumer, that is, utility, can be made measurable. Consumer surplus or buyer surplus is an economic measurement of the customer's excess benefit. In an economy, a consumer surplus takes place when the consumer buys a product. In an economy, a consumer surplus takes place when the consumer is willing to pay more for a product than its market price. Consumer surplus is an important concept in the field of economics. Next, we move on to the meaning of the term consumer surplus. Consumer surplus is a tool for measuring the consumer welfare, and this surplus is defined as the excess of the social valuation of a product that goes over a price that is being actually paid. Next, we move on to measuring consumer surplus. Consumer surplus can be measured with the help of a formula that consumer surplus is equal to maximum price the consumer is willing to pay minus the actual price. The consumer surplus formula for multiple consumers can be expressed as follows. Consumer surplus is equal to half into QD into delta P. Here, QD represents the quantity at equilibrium where supply and demand are equal, that is, at equilibrium point quantity demanded. Next, delta P represents the price, maximum price the consumer is willing to pay minus the actual price that is prevailing in the market. Let us see the concept with the help of an example. Consumer surplus always increases as the price of goods falls and decreases as the price of a good rises. Consumer surplus always increases as the price of a good falls and decreases as the price of a good rises. For example, let's say that you bought a music concert ticket for rupees 100. But you were expecting and willing to pay rupees 300. The difference between maximum price and actually you paid is the consumer surplus. Here in this example, rupees 200 is your consumer surplus. Let us see the example with the help of a diagram. The consumer surplus is a triangular area under the demand curve and above the price which you actually paid, that is rupees 100 in our example. So here the sloping down demand curve indicates the law of diminishing marginal utility. In the x-axis, quantity demand is measured. In the y-axis, price is measured. Here, consumer surplus is the red color triangle portion where you paid 300, you are willing to pay is 300, but you actually paid is rupees 100. The remaining 200 rupees is your consumer surplus. Next, we move on to the importance of the concept consumer surplus. The first important point is welfare measurement. It provides a quantitative measurement of economic welfare or well-being of a consumer in a market. Economists and policy makers to assess the benefits, it helps the economist and policy maker to assess the benefits that the consumer derive from purchasing goods and services. Next important point is efficiency. In an efficient market, resources are used in a manner that satisfies the consumer preference to the greatest possible extent. Next point is price sensitivity. Consumer surplus is largely, if a consumer surplus is large, it indicates that consumers are relatively more price sensitive. That means that they can obtain significant benefits from lower prices. When the price is low, their welfare is high. When the price is high, their welfare will be low. Next important thing is consumer behavior. Understanding consumer surplus can shed light on consumer behavior and it helps to explain why consumers make certain purchase decisions and how they react when the prices or changes in the market. Next important thing is policy analysis. It is often used to analyze the effects of government policies such as taxes, subsidies and other regulations, that how the government policies benefit to the consumer or harm to the consumer with the help of understanding the consumer surplus concept. A well-designed policy can increase the consumer surplus by reducing or removing or addressing the problem of market failures and externalities. Next point is market dynamics. Changes in consumer surplus indicates that shifts in market dynamics. A decrease in consumer surplus may signal a decrease in consumer welfare. An increase in consumer surplus may indicate that increase in consumer welfare. This information used to identify the market trends and assess the impact of various market interventions. Next point is market competition. It is often used to evaluate the effects of competitions in the market. Competitive market price tend to driven out, competitive market prices tends to be driven out to a level consumer surplus is maximized. It helps in analyzing the different market effects like monopolies, oligopolies and other market structures on consumer welfare. Last important thing is pricing strategies. Business can use knowledge of consumer surplus to design their pricing strategies. Companies can attract more customers and potentially increase their market share through efficient pricing strategies. Let us conclude, when consumer surplus increases, it generally means that consumers are better off, while a decrease in consumer surplus means it indicates that consumers are worse off. It provides a quantitative measure of consumer well-being, helps assess the market efficiency and guide policy making and inform businesses and pricing strategies. It is a valuable tool for economists, businesses and policy makers to understand and improve the functioning of the market and well-being of the consumers. These are my frequently asked questions. Thank you. Thank you for patient listening.